All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today, Nick Heyman. How are you doing?
Not too bad, Kent. How are you?
So Nick Heyman's been on before. I think before we talked about you were one of the very first people at Facebook, and that was very interesting. But you've done some interesting things since then, most notably becoming a venture capitalist.
Not quite yet, but close.
But hey, all kinds of people declare themselves venture capitalists the second they think about investing in something. And you have a venture capital firm named Dino VC. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how does that go? We make fun all the time of there's a podcast now where VCs come on, and every time people ask, "How did you become a VC?" And you would think that over time, a venture capitalist would put together some story, like, oh, even it's not true. Like, well, ever since I was a kid, I want to. And the answer 9 times out of 10 is, I fell into it. And the irony, of course, is they never fell into it from the housing projects of Chicago.
Yeah.
They fell, I was at Stanford, and my dad, it's like that. So how did you become a VC?
I totally fell into it. No, I'm kidding. It goes back about almost 2 years now, but I got really interested in the technology that was sort of powering these autonomous vehicles, or what the autonomous vehicle future sort of looked like. And there are all kinds of weird convergences going on in the automotive transportation industry right now. And the more I sort of looked at it, I had a friend who had found a company who was interested, and I do angel invest. I have been an angel investor for a while, and I started looking into this, and I'm like, this is really interesting. And how do you start to put these pieces together, or what are these pieces, or how does this fit in? Is this a good investment?
Right.
And as I started digging into that, you start to see some gaps, and it gets really interesting, especially where we're going to with these large themes of transportation, mobility, and living in San Francisco. We kind of see an experimental lab sort of going on in front of our eyes, almost on a daily, weekly,
right.
monthly basis.
And how did this happen? Like, I look at, you sort of look at technologies emerging. So you're at Facebook. So this is the emergence of social networks.
Yep.
And arguably it emerged the social networks emerged, it's just the backstory, but they emerged at that time maybe because digital photography just came along and bandwidth just got to be enough, and everybody had like photos that they could actually share. It wasn't many years ago that all of a sudden you went from, hailing taxis to riding Ubers. Not like, hey, let's talk about this is a really interesting idea, but literally like, I'm taking an Uber here and there. Like in LA, it notoriously changed nightlife where you couldn't really go out because if you were drinking,
you couldn't get a cab.
You can't get a cab in the middle of Olympic, whatever. Did something why did Uber happen and Lyft when they did? Was there something that changed, or did the hive mind just suddenly go, oh?
No, I think so. So we have some interesting technology pieces that are changing, right? First of all, the phone and the ease of access of mobile phone is kind of huge. But we also have these models, which have been around for a long time, like taxis, things like that. And they've been a little sclerotic in terms of their ability to grow, or they've built up barriers which have made them really difficult to use and really entrenched. And I think when you sort of combine that with a regulatory framework which is constrained, and San Francisco has done a magnificent job of this, of just creating problems for people getting from point A to point B, I think the frustration sort of boils over at a certain point, and that's where you start to see some of these models. And as the convenience, ease of use, constraints sort of push people, they start popping up in weird, random ways. And, we see that with the scooters right now. So,
well, and I think Uber, I got to learn this trick, maybe as an investor, that whenever people start making their living on something, it's going to happen. Yeah. Like when eBay came along and the first time some guy said, hey,
this is my store.
This is what I do. Or Airbnb, like the first time someone said, I'm paying my mortgage in 2008 because of this thing. And the first time I hopped in an Uber, and the person was like, "Oh yeah, I go to San Francisco State, and I'm paying my tuition, driving around." And you're like, okay, like you've got thousands of people with an entrepreneurial spirit energizing this thing.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
And what are the secondary models that emerge from the primary use case, right? So I'm not picking on scooters, but I'm just going to say for the scooters, what's really interesting is you've got this primary use case, which is getting from point A to point B, which is fantastic. But then you also have this twofold money-making operation on the back end, which is the people who charge the scooters.
The
people who charge
about this.
Yeah.
So explain how that works. This is crazy.
There are people who go around and collect the scooters and charge them and then just deposit them back on the network. And the number of scooters that you do basically translates into pure cash.
And it's like $20 a night or something if you charge a scooter. So if you get 10 scooters,
there you go.
Do the math, you're making $200 a night.
You're making $200 a night, and you're at $1,000 a week, $4,000 a month, and you can do this if you have like 5 electrical plugs.
Right.
It's not that hard to do the math. But you also have the secondary piece where those companies will pay the city either a day use fee for the permit to operate those or a monthly use fee. Right. So you're also raising taxation revenue on the back end as well. So that's the other piece too, right? That's like the marijuana thing. Like, okay, how do you feel morally about marijuana? It's like, here's your tax revenue. Yeah.
Well, you're feeling pretty good.
You're
about
feeling
it
pretty. If you're
okay.
a municipality, you're kind of okay, right?
Right.
Like so. So you've got these two sort of secondary models which sort of emerge from that, and it's solving a fundamental transportation problem. So it's.
The scooters, at least here in San Francisco, they swept in pretty quick. Like they dumped them.
But that's the model. So
right, they came in.
Yeah.
The adoption.
Yeah.
And they weren't just sitting around with people looking at them and go, "What the hell's that?" Suddenly, you saw just groups of people
everywhere,
bang, 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 moving around. Especially the train from Silicon Valley ends up kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
And it's like 8 blocks to get to where a lot of people work. So that's not, it's 8 blocks like a drive. Do you get an Uber? Yeah, it's close, but not really. Do you take a bike? Yeah. It's sort of perfect for hopping on a scooter and just leaving at the other end.
The bike actually is difficult for that use case, right? So the scooter makes more sense. Yeah.
And what do you think? So there's there's dock models and dockless models.
Yeah.
And the dock model is there's an area where there's a bunch of bikes and there are always bikes in that area, and you go to other areas and they're placed in various places. The dockless model is just you lock the thing up to wherever it is and
you just drop it off.
Because you've got an app.
Yeah.
How do you contrast? The dockless thing kind of bugs me, because I don't know where the thing is. It just seems like there's all kinds of people putting the thing in their house. Like, it seems so problematic to me. Obviously, it's much easier from an infrastructure perspective.
Well, the thing, it depends on what the mode of transportation is, right? So we've got Scoot, we've got Ride, the bike company, we've got the scooter companies, although not right now, but permits are coming pretty soon. And you really can't make the argument, like, you've got to incorporate bicycles, like just regular bicycles, into this conversation if you've got a problem with sort of dockless. Because, like, there are people's bikes who are just chained up against, street signs everywhere. So, like, what's the line? What is the cutoff? And obviously, if you have business and, like, all of a sudden your parking lot is full of scooters, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But the flip side is, if it's a little bit of sidewalk space, like, it might take up the same profile that, like, a bicycle does. Is that a problem?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The revelation for me with this infrastructure, and it's, I guess, the same thing. We should have figured this out sooner because of Uber. Like, the delightful thing about Uber when you first take it, aside from the fact that it shows up, you probably forget that this was a big deal. The first time you just hop out.
No friction, yeah.
You just walk out the door.
Yeah.
And I get in a taxi now, I sometimes almost do that.
Yeah.
Like, almost walk away.
Well, we've almost trained ourselves to sort of avoid that cash piece. And, it's kind of crazy because the tipping on those services don't bother me, but the forgetting to tip from the previous ride, and then when I'm looking for a new ride and having to put the tip in from the previous ride, that does.
That's
I'm
really
like,
annoying.
Just put the tip in the price and, like, don't bother me about the if I so.
I don't know why they should just set always telling other people about their products is always a great idea.
Yeah.
But just say, hey, 15% every time.
It should be a slider in the settings. Like I want to tip 15, 25% sort of automatically based on my star rating. It could be easier, but I understand the dynamics around it. But
I get the same thing. So I take a bike to work now a bunch, like it's Go bikes. And it's just the lovely thing about it is you get the bike, you ride to work. It's not the best bike on the planet, but then you just leave the bike.
There you go.
And you walk off the bike, and there's no bike lock, tire, bring it into your place of business, any of that crap. That's pretty lovely. Like, it's pretty nice.
So this all goes back to your original question, like what's going on? What was the change? What was the inflection point? And I think what we're seeing, or the reason why I'm excited, the reason why I'm doing this is we're seeing this giant trend away from the focus of getting from point A to point B. It used to be, and we have trillions of dollars of industry in the production of the vehicle as that process, and the sale of the vehicle as the method for that process. All these models that we have, whether it's the scooters, the bikes, the Ubers, the Lyfts, they all turn that vehicle ownership into a service component, and people want the service. People want to get from point A to point B. How you do it, when it comes to car dealerships and like negotiating a price and paying for insurance and a parking spot, it's a hell of a lot easier just to consume the service. And so as we move into that, and as that production line sort of gets digitized, that's kind of, we're seeing this sort of unfold in front of our eyes.
It's kind of a funny lesson too, in like people looking at the same information and making different decisions. And this kind of, I'll get to my point. Like the Facebook story, like, so Facebook starts at Harvard, and every school it goes to, it takes over, what's it, like 90% of the population in days. Right?
Crazy. 72 hours, 20,000 people.
Okay, so this is awesome. So then there was like another company, I can't remember the name, I think maybe InCircle, and they started at Stanford, and it was kind of similar to Facebook. Same thing happens. Boom, 90% of Stanford takes it. And they go, this is great. We're going to take this and sell it as software to universities. And you've never heard of that company again.
Wasn't InCircle the predecessor to Orkut? Like, wasn't that?
Yeah.
I remember those guys.
So it's the same piece of it. And like everyone kind of had the same thought of like, your car sits around and does nothing 96% of the time. So why do 100,000 people need 100,000 cars? And so you had all these models of like sharing the car, where you
the get around,
the keys and all that stuff. And it turns out people didn't want to share cars; they just wanted rides.
Not so much. Turo is doing really, really well.
And what are they doing?
They're a peer-to-peer car sharing. So it's much like the same model that any of the sort of dockless applications have. But they have a sort of inventory of vehicles that are owned and operated by the owners, and they're parked on the street or whatever. Your phone is the gateway to the car. And it's sort of the same thing. Like, I need a car right now. And you can say, well, within a couple 100 feet, there are X cars, and you can hop in.
Yeah.
That's their model. Yeah.
But it's not the monster of like an Uber or a Lyft.
No, but it radically changes the method of consuming the transportation service, which is like, if I need to drive. So we're in an urban area. We're in San Francisco. So our geography is constrained to 5 miles or 7 miles. Well, I mean, nobody goes out west.
You go to Napa on the weekend. That's
there you go. You go to Napa. But if you've got to go down to the valley, right, and you don't want to take the train and you need a car, the model for a rental is pretty broken, right? Like, you're not going to go to Avis, you're not going to go to Hertz, and
and somehow their model is, it's $20 a day, and then 2 days cost $500. Like, I don't even know how they do it.
They're in a lot of trouble. Like,
it's just ridiculous.
Hertz is distressed. Like, their model is completely gone right now. They're in. Yeah,
because when I start to go to LA now, I just take an Uber.
Yeah.
If I'm just going to 3 different points of the compass, I'm like, that's going to cost $40, $50 somehow a rent-a-car is going to cost $180 a day. I don't know how, but it will.
But the business aspect of like a large hub, like renting your car
Right.
after you get off the plane in Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York, like that is gone.
Yeah.
Like it still exists in the Midwest where it's more spread out, but on coastal cities it's getting harder and harder.
I mean, the disruption of it has been so swift and crazy. Like taxi companies must be just wiped out. I mean, they kind of came back at it a little bit with Flywheel and that kind of thing.
But they created this problem. It's kind of the law of unintended consequences here, which is that, we had this problem. It's the genesis of Uber, right? You could not get a cab you were on hold for 45 minutes trying to get a cab to come and then it was still a 50-50 shot, right?
Right.
How could that business model not get sort of swept away?
Yeah, and I think you had the social aspect of, I mean, I think initially, like, why didn't everybody invest in Uber? Well, it was a gypsy cab company.
Yep.
Was kind of the reputation. Are you really going to get in a stranger's car?
Yep.
And the answer is yeah.
Well, they started off with the black cars, right?
That's
and
right.
The black cars, those were dead inventory, and those drivers loved it, right?
Yeah.
Price premium, dead inventory. They could make money when the airport runs were not happening. They were already licensed for livery, so they could use that. And then as we got into
and it turns out the taxi companies had no power because even their drivers didn't care. Because the drivers were like, well, if I can make more money driving a Lyft, I don't care. So you had.
Well, I don't know if I mean, this is going back a long time ago, but I think this was maybe, I want to say like when Willie Brown was mayor. I remember reading headlines in the Chronicle about expanding medallions and pushback from the unions or the cab companies.
Yeah.
And it's like people want to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
At some point, people figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
you're screwed. And cab companies just aren't that powerful. Like with city, a little bit, but not. They don't know how much money they give. I mean, don't be cynical. Like nothing compared to the oil company or
for 50 years they were like a reliable donation. And,
I guess that's true. Why then did so emerging after that are bikes and scooters? Why did those take time to emerge? Like what? Why now? Like, why this year? Scooters, 2018.
Well, scooters I think are interesting, right? I think bikes themselves. I've tried all of them, and this is just completely subjective. Depending on the bike, the e-bike aspect, the e-bike kind of works. So
the e-bike is when you it's like an exoskeleton.
Pedal
a little bit, and it gives you a bunch of
pedal assist. So that kind of works. I think the bike itself, you're putting a lot of burden on your transportation side. Like all of a sudden, like if I bike too fast, now I need to take a shower, or
it's a physical.
It's a physical activity where it's great. I mean, you feel great after doing it. Well, depending, but you feel great. But now you need to take a shower, so now I need to pack clothes, an extra shirt. Yeah. Your whole commute situation becomes a lot more complicated. If you want to get sort of from point A to point B without hopping in an Uber or being stuck in traffic, which is a huge part of it, or figuring out the parking situation, then now the scooter makes a lot of sense. So.
Yeah. And so what is the battle? I mean, the kind of the negative thing that happened when the scooters came out, I mean, bikers can behave pretty badly, but generally they're on the street in the bike lane. They're not usually up on the sidewalk. I mean, the scooters just seem to be characterized by a lot of people going a little bit too fast, like on the sidewalk. Like, okay, like.
I mean, I don't think we have behavioral norms for it. So I just came back from Europe, and what's really funny is there are a lot of electric scooters in Europe that are just used as personal transportation vehicles.
Yeah.
So there's no company that's providing that, but they seem to get along really fine on the sidewalk or in whatever. You kind of don't notice them. It kind of goes to the background. I think one of the issues is just that the sort of flood the zone, which the scooter companies used, which is like, all of a sudden there are 2,000 of these things on the street.
Yeah.
It's a little too quick. It's a little too quick for some people to sort of wrap their minds around. And, San Francisco is a weird town. So yeah.
I mean, I assume, judging by how quickly they appear to be adopted, that this will get sorted out. Like somehow, like they're not going to just ban scooters in this.
You never know, like where you wouldn't think so because there's tax revenue. The question I have is if you're going to start sort of selecting modes of transportation, well, then the taxation has to be equal. Scooters can actually create revenue, raise revenue. So at what point do we start licensing the bikes? Because the use case is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
You're spending a ton of money on building bike lanes in the city, repaving everything, gridlock everywhere.
Right.
At what point do we say, like, okay, well, where's the revenue generation, or where's the paying for the infrastructure?
I'm kind of curious about bike exceptionalism because you've got the bike coalition in San
They
Francisco.
run SFMTA.
Yeah, and they seem to do things. I mean, I've criticized them in the past because bikes is a mode of transportation. You never see a Hispanic family toddling down the bike lane, right?
Yep.
Like there's a very specific age and demographic
Absolutely.
that rides bikes.
Yes.
Can afford bikes, all that kind of thing. And, I've always felt people aren't in their cars because they're too lazy to be on a bike.
No.
They don't want to be in their car. They're trying to take the kids somewhere and go to their job. Like that's why people are in cars.
Yep.
So kind of criticizing people, why aren't you in a bike? It's like, well, because my job's somewhere that most people don't choose to be in a car for no reason whatsoever.
It's not necessarily a great experience sitting in traffic, right? You want to get from point A to point B, do what you need to do, but you can't really bring your power tools on a bicycle.
And they've toned exactly, and they've toned it down too. But they used to do those rides where they would try to create chaos. Do you remember this?
Oh yeah.
It was like Friday.
Yeah.
They'd all go on a ride. And
Critical
they would,
mass.
Critical mass. Try to create kind of chaos, and I think they figured out like, man, if you want to not get support, take somebody who's got to get home to the kids in 45 minutes and make it an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Well,
but again, who was on those critical mass bike rides, right? Like that was
guys.
and girls sometimes,
couple,
but
yeah, sure.
But
it's like the Bernie Sanders, 18 and 19-year-olds. It's very diverse. So
how are my rights as a pedestrian being helped by if we want to go down that rabbit hole, like
exactly.
let's start going down that rabbit hole, but it gets weird quickly,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was talking to a guy. This is kind of strange, but there's roller skating. Mm-hmm. There's this older black guy who has roller skates and has actually gotten the city to put in like a roller rink in Golden Gate Park.
Nice.
He skates. It's cool. And he's very involved. To get something done in Golden Gate Park, you're involved with the city and you're involved with a lot of stuff. But he's like, those lanes should not be bike lanes. They should be alt transport lanes.
Agreed. Absolutely.
If you want to roller skate down them, you start to get some questions as things get electrified.
Yep.
Can you ride a motorcycle down them? I don't know. But he's like, those should be roller skate lanes. They should be skateboard lanes. They should be whatever, unicycle lanes, like alt transport, not,
And
not
that's a fair way. That's a fair way to look. How do you regulate that effectively? Is it a speed cap on electrified vehicles? Maybe that's the way you go. But again, and it's an SF Bike Coalition thing. It's like you really can't distinguish between sort of a personal mode of transportation and sort of protect the bike. I think you get into all sorts of weird areas there.
I should get somebody from the Bike Coalition on. I wonder how much they care. Like, do they care? They probably do.
I don't know if they do.
Like, do they care? I mean, if there's a bike lane and bikes are in it, do they care if there's also a scooter in it? Like, I mean,
I don't know.
They're anti-car. I get that.
I think they're kind of anti. I think they're kind of pro-bike.
Yeah,
they're the Bicycle Coalition. So I don't think they like the. I don't know. I don't know how they feel. They like the Ford pedal bikes. I don't know that they like the electrified ride bikes.
Yeah, it's kind of odd because it seems like the case is pretty difficult, right? There's these scooters that people like. They can't be on the sidewalk. They shouldn't be in with there's an obvious place that they should be.
Absolutely.
And just because you built it, it's like,
well,
too bad.
Again, right? So, what does this come down to? Well, really, we should build a decent public transit system. Why San Francisco doesn't have a subway being built under every street, every major thoroughfare, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But that would alleviate a lot of these pressures because people want to get from point A to point B.
Well, I heard a thesis. I guess it was Andy Grove, the Intel CEO, somehow got into transportation at some point. And his whole theme, maybe it's provocative, but he's like, all this bullet train, building subways is ridiculous. It's naive. It's simply not going to happen in any time frame or any scale that matters. And his point was, even coming up, this is before Uber, even coming up with new vehicles that are whatever, self-driving or less polluting is ridiculous because of how long it takes the fleet to turn over. And so his thesis was you need to do something to existing vehicles to solve these problems.
I don't know. That's questionable perspective. So you look at what's going on in Norway right now, which I believe all new cars must be electric. So their economy has finally turned, and they are sort of going crazy with Teslas right now.
Right.
You look at the China mandate, where I think I might get this wrong, but they have a certain year where all new vehicle sales will be EV only. That turns over a fleet. I mean,
I guess that's true.
That you look at what is it? Europe, it's 2025.
Yeah.
Like diesel goes away. Like it must be either gasoline or diesel from. I'm sorry, it must be either gasoline or electric.
Right.
The price of gasoline is so high there; it's all going to go electric.
Right. And this is good news for the auto companies, right? Like,
well, yes and no.
I mean, aren't they going to have to? Everyone has to buy a new car.
Well, it is, but again, this goes back to why we're starting the fund, which is that the auto companies in specific have a business model which is built on this margin they make on a vehicle sale.
Right.
This is their entire business. They optimize their supply chain, their manufacturing line, their industrialization. It's all part of this.
Right.
When you go electric, a lot of that stuff starts changing. And
Interesting.
You sort of see this in the Tesla Model 3. I don't know if you've seen one, but that is a bare bones sort of service-oriented vehicle.
Okay.
Like its job is to get you from point A to point B with as much minimalization as possible.
Right.
And it's fantastic at it. And like you don't care about like all the things that the car companies care about, which is like comfort or like driving or like all these sort of experiences which are sort of secondary. You don't care because you've got the bare bones function and you're getting to do that as easily as possible.
Right.
So these guys have been addicted, or not addicted, but their business has been this margin, this manufacturing piece. And when you start to unlock, the scooters, the bikes, the Ubers, the Lyfts, where you've got these service models, they are not technology companies in the sense that they can adapt their sales, their margin for vehicle manufacturing to encompass these. So they're in for a rough ride.
I mean, people are making real decisions. Like I have friends who are like, yeah, we got 2 cars. I think I'm going to sell the one of them, and then we'll just use one car plus, Lyft and Uber.
Yeah.
Like that's a real decision. Like today, of people, I don't need a car.
Yeah, and when you look 5 to 7 years out, and that car has no driver, and you can say, I'm gonna quote unquote invest in a Tesla and rent it out 50% of the time,
right? Where
it just like ferries people around the city,
right?
You need people who can wash the cars at that point, but
right. And so what is that transition, or why is that transition? Like why, okay, we got this Uber thing, people are making a living, it works. Why then is it must be the case, well, forget the driver, the cars are just going to drive themselves? Is it like, why?
That's a complicated one, but there are a lot of pieces going into that, which are that with EVs especially, you've got a lot of range anxiety, right?
Right.
So the charging, there are a lot of pieces, but one of the drivers is that just the charging or the downtime of the vehicle. So if my car is parked in front of my office, theoretically it should be charging.
Right.
Right. Can I do that at my office? You've got like 4 spots where you can do that.
Right.
If the car can drive itself to the charger, charge and be ready,
okay,
then that's not a bad thing to do. You get a lot of other effects, right? The autonomous systems theoretically will be able to drive better than the human drivers.
Yep.
But a lot of it comes down to cost as well, which is that when you look at a logistics company or a shipping company or a trucking company or any of these pieces which are really driving this autonomous piece, the burden cost of operating that fleet is a lot on the human resource side.
Right.
So if you want to have a killer feature, or not even a killer feature, if you want to next level your Uber, your Lyft, your fleet trucking company, you want an autonomous vehicle because you want to reduce that human resource cost that's going to take.
It seems to me, is it going to come first to trucks? Is that the kind of obvious?
So it depends, but for super crews, for highway crews, like trucks, it could be pretty close, right?
Yeah.
For urban area, Cruise has the mandate for San Francisco for the end of this year.
Yeah.
Will they get there? I don't know, but for fixed geographies or for constrained boundaries for these machine learning models, you can do much closer to that 95% of that solution than you can when you incorporate all of it. So
interesting. I had Antonio Garcia Martinez on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
And
Chaos Monkey's author,
a bit of a troublemaker.
Roguish character.
Thinks the whole thing's coming down, or at least says it is. By which I mean society. And
yes, he does.
Which, who knows? But he pointed out that in almost every state in the union, driving a truck is the highest paid non-college job.
Yeah.
In a lot of them.
But you can't get truck drivers right now.
I guess that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a huge lack of truck drivers. And if you're a truck driver, you can get hired. But to become a truck driver is actually difficult right now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What did the one of the social implications that I heard about and why? So with self-driving cars, I mean, it's just like kind of that thing of like, am I going to get in a car that doesn't have a steering wheel or has a steering wheel? Like, there's that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I've heard of like elderly people who can't drive anymore.
Yeah.
Actually saying, that's pretty cool. Like, I can get
or
that
a parent, like, you know, I've got a teenager. Do I want to give my teenager the keys of a car?
Yeah.
Or do I want to give them something which will get them from point A to point B?
Yeah. So you think that social transition can happen where you get in a car and you don't have a wheel or?
I mean, it's hard for me to envision that because I love driving. I mean, my passion, you know, when I'm behind the wheel and like, you know, the road is good.
Right.
It's hard to imagine, but I think at a certain point we'll get there.
Yeah.
Right. And we just won't notice.
Right. And what about, isn't the, like, part of the issue with the self-driving car is that people crash 1,000 times a day or whatever it is around the country, but you get one autonomous vehicle hitting a pedestrian, and
if it bleeds, it leads, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like it's easy to take shots, but I think it's coming, or think is wrong. It's coming because so. What are, again, let's factor it out a little bit and let's look at the secondary pieces of vehicle operation, right? So liability is a huge component. So when your insurance is, $1,000 a year versus the autonomous car, which is $200 a year, because the insurance company can look through and say, the number one type of accident, fender bender, that happens, the autonomous system avoids this.
Right.
So liability rates can go down. That's going to drive that cost curve. That's going to drive that adoption curve as well.
Right.
Right. Like, are people going to say, well, I'm afraid about the robots, or, I'd rather have an extra $800 a year?
So how do the systems get together? Because I feel like a couple things where people go, okay, here's the great thing, like all these cars are connected, so when one car learns something, it can teach the other cars.
We are so not there yet.
And the other one, why not? Like, what's the...
Well, because we live in silos. So, we're at the point of sort of algorithmic competition. So everybody who's building these systems aren't finalized. We're maybe, in the best case, 3 years away from these systems being finalized.
Right.
So we're in the experimentation, data acquisition, data gathering. The hardware's not there. Right. The software's not there. The sensors are not there. Like, the final pieces for this to happen, we've got some of them. We've got like the cruise control and the turning. We've got the assisted Tesla autopilot.
Yeah.
we've got the same system in BMWs, but we're not there yet. We're at least 3 years away from seeing the actual result of all these experimental vehicles that we're seeing, all these tests that we're doing. We're still a while away. So,
right. And what's that philosophical question that people have about cars, where it's like, well, if you have a car that would make a decision to kill
the passenger,
or three other people, or three pedestrians.
Yeah.
Nobody wants the car that would kill the passenger. They want to kill the three pedestrians, right?
This is not a question that we are equipped to answer, but there's an actuary table from an insurance company which tells you which liability bears out the better. So divorce it from the ethical question, because really, who can answer the ethical question? But from a liability perspective, what is the optimal outcome from that financing?
Right.
That's how that question is going to get answered.
Right. So you think it's pretty inevitable that it'll be just the economics and the logic of it. There's just going to be self-driving cars, and that's how.
Well, so the first step is sort of electric vehicles, right? So you look at the sort of complexity of an electric vehicle. It's much, much lower than a combustion engine. Mm-hmm. So the manufacturing complexity goes down quite large. So what are going to be sort of how do you improve on that ride, or what are the things that sort of you want to do in that vehicle when everything is pretty much the same in an electric vehicle? Well, all of a sudden you're going to start to say, well, I'd really rather be texting,
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, not that texting is what you want to do, but like, if you're stuck in traffic between Dallas or wherever, or stuck in traffic in New Jersey or in Washington or in San Francisco Bay Area, do you really want, is that dead time that's behind the wheel, or is that do you have other things you'd rather be doing in that?
Right. Interesting.
And so that's going to be one of the drivers. So there are going to be beautiful drives where you really enjoy driving in the mountains in Montana, right? Like, I don't know if that goes away, but driving from Palo Alto to San Francisco,
right?
I'd rather I mean, not even read a newspaper, but I'd rather read a book, or I'd rather listen to a podcast, or do something where I'm not pulling my hair out.
Right. And what else changes? Like, what are the big visionaries think change if you've got that system? Like, do people live 400 miles from where they work, or do parking lots become parks, or like, what are the?
There are a lot of pieces, but understand that the battle that's happening right now, right? Like, the reason for one of the main drivers for autonomous systems, right? You've got a company like Google. Google wants your time, right? They're really frustrated that they're hardcore engineers. They're really frustrated that their services are interrupted by this other UI, and your attention is captured in the vehicle.
Interesting,
right?
Is that why is Google into the cars, and why is
I've just told you they'd rather you spend that dead time using Google services.
Right.
They tried to get Chrome in the dashboard. No car companies wanted to play, so they're like, well.
Wow.
We've got a bunch of Stanford people who worked on this DARPA project and who know how to build self-driving cars. Like, why not take a shot at this?
And what will Google do? Like, if they succeed, they don't build cars, do they? They make the infrastructure, they rent out the infrastructure, or what do they like?
No, they figure out how to have your phone say, like, oh, looks like you're in one of our Waymo cars. Like, do you want to, watch this movie? Or, we've created some special services, or like, you get the little reminder. But essentially it's like, how do we farm you back to YouTube? Or how do we get your attention on our service?
And it has to be somebody at Google scale, right? That does it, like,
for the autonomous piece, or for the secondary piece?
The autonomous piece.
I mean, Google definitely has the vision for it, right? Like, they have the ability to say, like, we can do this. But there are a bunch of startups working on the same sort of stuff.
Right.
Their secret sauce is in the integration of the sensor piece right now,
right,
and the algorithmic model behind the object detection on their sensor data acquisition, and they are far ahead of.
And is it interesting to any other than the car companies? Like, is it a Facebook thing? Is it an Apple thing? Or
It's got to be, right? Like, so for a technology company, Google is making a play to capture. So the average commute is about 45 minutes each way.
Right.
So Google's making a play to transition that 45 minutes of time from your attention being captured in driving the vehicle onto a consumption of a service they're providing. Wow. So just by necessity, if you're any other company that's in that attention economy, you have to be in this space as well.
Wow. Well, so what does Apple have a play or Facebook have a?
Apple has a play. You see the result. Apple was they did not have a good focus on theirs, so they have a really good project. It's called Project Titan, but their sort of focus on that project, they didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
And Apple is weird in the sense that they could just write a check for a car company tomorrow and not even
well, that's true.
Miss. Yeah, they'd be like, the couch got shaked out, and we bought a car company.
Right.
But they haven't had. I don't think they've had the vision for where it goes. They had a partnership with Volkswagen that they announced a few weeks ago, which is the sort of weakest iteration of that Project Titan. But they're pretty far along on that, and it's great for us because we get to see some of the engineers that spin out of it, and we can write them checks. But the flip side of it is that they saw what Intel was doing. They built up their own effort. We've got some really hardcore car guys that are excited about this product, but it's not shelved, but I think it's just in limbo right now over at Apple.
Right. So what happens to the car companies then? Do they become service companies? Do they just get absorbed by tech companies? I mean,
that's a really good question. So this again, we go back to when you asked, why did you start this fund? This is one of the reasons on the not the venture side, but on the capital side. They're going to be under such threat to sort of digitize their services that they're going to need the software expertise to be able to do that.
Right.
And you can't really find that expertise really too much out of here. Of course, the Bay Area doesn't have a lock on this, but
kinda.
But kinda.
We're maybe Google does.
Furthest along
across the planet.
We're the furthest along just in terms of the pure software digital services model, which they're going to need to add very quick. And you see this too in the acquisitions that are being made. GM paid $1 billion for Cruise. Yeah. You see this starting to happen across the board, but does not seem to be directed. Does not seem to be sort of grand vision. And who can blame the car companies because they're busy making 15% margin on each vehicle that they.
It's just crazy when you see like Uber, when you see it happen. Like it happened. It wasn't like there's this idea that they're doing it in Japan or something like that. And Cruise, they're out there on the streets.
They're out there
driving around. They're a little hesitant for my.
Can't make those left turns yet.
They seem a little like a little froze up sometimes, but they're out there happening.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It is, and the other thing you've got to realize, like just on a pure valuation play, right? I think Uber theoretically is valued at around $62 billion in terms of secondary market. Whether or not that valuation is valid, let's just imagine like even if it's half of that, 30, they're worth more than certain car companies.
Yeah,
and they don't have the number of employees or a legacy production line that they need to support to live in that valuation.
Yeah.
So imagine when they get the autonomous car and can drop that driver piece out of it.
Yeah.
They live up to that valuation.
So both they and Lyft are working on that, I assume.
They are. Very, very hardcore.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's always struck me that the Uber and Lyft technologies aren't actually, the tech part's not that, doesn't strike me as being particularly complicated.
I mean, it's an arbitrage market, right? Like it's an arbitrage on-demand market with price variability.
Yeah. I mean, like compared to even AWS or something, it seems like, it's not a very tough technical challenge, really. I mean, that's always tough. But
it's tough.
Really.
It's tough. It's tough to sort of balance the capacity, like all the aspects of it. But, from a pure technology standpoint, we could probably make the argument that it's been done before.
Yeah, I mean, it's very socially interesting too, because you hop in a car in San Francisco and your driver's never from San Francisco.
Yeah.
They're from like Sacramento, and they've adopted their life to like, well, I get into the city at this time, and then I don't like drunk people, so I leave at that time, and it's kind of a fascinating social experiment they're running too.
But the flip side of it is, and I always talk to my Uber Lyft drivers because I'm always very curious. Like, are you making a living? Like, is this something you do? I'd say 90% of the time, they're all pretty happy because they get to control their schedule.
Yeah.
And what's even more fascinating is, like, Uber for a while was playing games with the drivers where, like, they'd give new drivers more business to get them sort of sticky, but most of them drive both now.
That's what's so funny. It's so perfectly competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got in a Lyft, and the driver was like, yeah, I just came from the Lyft party. I was like, what's the Lyft party? And it's like, yeah, they had hot dogs. You pull up your cart. They pulled up a gas truck and like filled everybody up. I'm like, oh, man. Like, these guys are competing for drivers.
They're competing for drivers, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's, again, the secondary effect is almost more interesting than the primary effect, right? Like, we've got the demand for the primary effect, the service.
Yeah.
So, but what is the secondary effect, right? Like,
right. Well, it's funny marketing because people are like, "Oh my God, the autonomous cars are going to like get rid of all the Lyft drivers, Uber drivers." Mark Andreessen talks about this, where he's like, "We always talk about how 500,000 jobs are created in a particular year, but he's like, what actually happened is like 8 million jobs were destroyed and 8.5 million jobs were created."
Yep.
So his response on like, well, Uber and the self-driving cars are going to unemploy all the Lyft or Uber drivers. He's like, that didn't exist as a job.
Yeah.
That was created 2 years ago.
And the job shifts. The most important thing is like, so trucking is a really interesting one, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh my God, we're going to destroy truck drivers' livelihoods.
Yeah.
The reality is that's not what's going to happen at all, because those trucks are going to need to be monitored.
Right.
Whether there's somebody in that vehicle who can take over to monitor it.
Right.
Or whether that person is in a control center, that can sort of take advantage of all the negatives of the truck driving lifestyle. So one of the reasons why we don't have truck drivers is because you're on the road. Right. It takes a real penalty on your family. It's hard to have a life outside of the truck driving.
Right.
So with autonomous trucks, if you're monitoring that truck at a station, that's 10 miles away from your house.
Yeah.
It's a much easier job to do than actually driving that load
or
from
securing
Chicago.
A particular stretch of road, maybe for 10 trucks that are passing through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the job shifts.
Yeah.
Right. And there doesn't seem to be recognition of that.
Right.
Which I find really interesting, because I'd be making that pitch to say, like, look, we don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to look different.
Yeah.
So what you're used to doing might change, but the job is still there.
Yeah. Well, and it's always tough, like Donald Trump and the coal miners aside, like whenever you try to save a job, it's just hard. If there's an economic force that's like pushing the other way, you just, you fight it for a while, and at some point, like, just stop mining the coal and go do the solar panels or something else, because it's just too hard.
I mean, maybe we'll have our coal-powered autonomous vehicles. We'll go back to steam power.
Right. Like, I know it's hard to switch a job at certain points, but it never seems like you win. And
I can't speak to that. I mean, when we talk to investors, one of the things we do is we just say, like, look, part of the thing that we're doing is we're trying to we don't know what the business model is going to be, so we can't say all these fancy finance terms, absolute return, XYZ. We can say that new business models pop up. Yeah. And like, just like you said, whoever thought you could make a living as an Uber driver? It did not exist 10 years ago.
Right. So what investment vector, what are you excited about? Is there any particular category? Is it the trucks? Is it the cars? Is it the scooters? I'm
excited about all of it, right? Yeah. Like it's just interesting to sort of be at the forefront. And the most interesting thing is you see these large technology companies making these next generation autonomous systems. You see these car companies making these EV platforms. Right. And they're both trying to get into each other's space. And this is happening in China. China, in the Chinese automotive market, EV and autonomous are aligned in the same car companies. We don't have that alignment in markets other than China right now. but it's what's exciting is that as you sort of go down this path, things radically change, right? Like, I step out of my house and the car just shows up, and like, what is that future going to be? And like, either you can sort of be part of that in a sense. And the other thing is there are a lot of pieces which just have not been figured out. There are silos. There are teams which are really good, and so there's a lot of interesting businesses where the convergence between sort of the technology companies and the automotive, there's a lot of software. So,
is there anything we should fear? Is that like a real estate price is going to crash? Is
I mean, like, I think there's some interesting studies, right, being done about like your range of urbanization once we get autonomous vehicle. It's just directly correlated to the battery capacity of that car.
Right.
Which
is like 300 miles still, isn't it?
300 mile, peak 300 miles, but 300 miles will sort of be the long range benchmark.
Right.
But, does that just mean that the urban footprint just expands? Like, it probably does.
But didn't we have that with like Skype and all that? Like video conferencing everyone was going to be working from home.
Yeah, but we never could work from home, right? Like working from home, like maybe if you worked at Yahoo, that worked. But
well, isn't that the first thing that they canceled too?
That was the first thing. We
always joke about like if somebody's working from home, like my Jonathan Abrams, my business partner, he's like when somebody's got kids, and they tell him they're working from home because he has kids, he's like, nope, they are not working if they have kids at home. I'm sorry, I don't believe it.
I feel like you have a very efficient 3 to 4 hours maximum.
Yep.
And you have availability, but like you are probably juggling something else with the headset on while you're working from home.
I know there's some companies that do it like GitHub but I think that has to be your model, your focus, your energy goes to managing it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But again, what we're doing is we're exchanging the dead time where you've got a captive driving interface with a free time, whether that's productive free time or not, right? Like, I think you can legitimately say if the car's driving yourself, like, and I've got good Wi-Fi or good network coverage,
right,
I should be able to, work. Yeah. It's like the Caltrains, right? Like, people do work on Caltrain.
Right. That's so crazy. Are you, like, it's just odd thinking about, I was talking to my sister, and she's got kids or like teenagers, and like a lot of teenagers like don't learn to drive now.
No, license.
That seems... Like when I was a teenager, you turned 16.0. Like there was one thing you did on your 16th birthday. You got in your car, you got the hell out of there. Like, see ya.
Yeah.
It's just shocking that a teenager would be like, nah, I'm fine.
Well, what are we seeing the result of? Are we seeing the result of like a lack of investment in infrastructure for like the last, what has it been? Almost 15, 16 years, right? Like the image of a car, like all the fun stuff of the car has been subsumed by the parking, the paying the insurance, the gas prices, like all the negatives.
That was not in American Graffiti.
That was not in American Graffiti, right? Like, and I'd love to go back there. I mean, I want my kids to be interested, but like it's hard to be, right? Like, it's I feel in. The car manufacturers kind of created this problem a little bit by their sort of slicing and dicing of segments. There is really no fun entry point for like a 16, 17-year-old.
Right.
And, like, as a parent, you're not going to buy your kid, like, a high-performance car at 16, and so it's changed. It's changed a lot.
It's crazy.
But, again, it fundamentally gets down to what's more important, the driving, which the romance has sort of been lost on,
right, or
the getting from point A to point B.
Yeah. Wow. What an industry.
It's kind of crazy. $7 trillion.
You're the future. Does anybody compete with you, by the way? Like, are there other VC for?
There are a few. It's small. It's one hand. The number of people who are focused in
that surprises me a little bit. I mean, I guess everybody dabbles in it, but
why would you? Why would you? Because you would have been sort of enterprise. Like, so the numbers were really big to start a company, and you were based off of a production line. But the software that goes into these, it hadn't been unlocked until we had a service model that sort of validated that. And, now I think there's more interest. But again, as you sort of slice each one of those components, it just gets more exciting from starting new businesses. Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've done this thing.
You tell me. You are the.
This is fantastic. It's just a fascinating topic, and it's fascinating because we all experience it. So we're not talking about AI or machine learning or drones, unless you have a freaking drone that you.
Well, we did not get to talk about the flying cars, which are coming.
By the way, I have heard credibly that Embra Air.
Yeah, there are 4 companies. So, and this is the crazy thing, right? 2 of those are based here. You know what commute problem they're solving?
San Jose to San Francisco.
You got it.
That is insane. Really?
Really.
Because ever since the Jetsons, where it just works.
I'm just telling you,
beautifully.
Yep.
So what are they building? How
they're building? So the same drones that are out there now.
Yeah.
If you basically step up those drones.
Yep.
You have your flying car.
Okay, so it's electric.
It's electric.
But I assume the general public is not going to be doing the jets and helipad on the roof, or is that the idea?
It's tough to say, but you've got a lot more space when you make it 3-dimensional, right? When you've got the vertical axis to be able to travel in, and it's not that. It's hard to crash when something is 100 feet away from you in another vertical lane.
Right.
We could get there, right? You're just, again, the important, or not again, but the battery technology is important, but the drone use case sort of bears it out. So now we just need a 4-passenger drone that's going from San Francisco to San Jose or Palo Alto, and
I joke about it, but there you go.
No, there's no joking about it. There's seriously,
aviation companies
you've got Airbus, you've got Embraer, you've got 2 startups that are Bay Area based that are working on this that are hugely funded. And again, the problem is nobody wants to sit on 101 in traffic.
Yeah, that's crazy. By the way, I think ABC is doing a live action update of the Jetsons.
Really?
Yeah, that could be fake news, but I think I heard that. It's a podcast, man. Nobody checks. Nobody fact checks.
I don't know that I'd watch that, but
yeah, you say that about everything.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not a TV guy.
I'm not a TV guy.
How could that work? A story about blah, blah, blah?
Who would remember the Jetsons?
I barely I watched the Jetsons retro TV.
That's what I'm saying. I was on the tail end of syndicated reruns of that.
Yeah.
In the afternoon, and I only watched it because it was animated, not because I understood it.
And by the way, for anybody who doesn't remember, the Jetsons was this show about when the future was cool, the future's great, and you fly to work in your jetpack, and then you don't eat food, you take pills. In retrospect, I want some of those shows you realize in the 60s, everybody making them was on drugs, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in these things. I wonder if the Jetsons was that, some message about dystopian society, and we're this is cool. And
I wonder there's got to be some sort of dystopian music remix of the Jetsons where you're just this is the grim future, right?
Well, and the robots are the robot looks like a French maid.
Yeah.
It's a maid, but it's a woman. It's probably horrific to go back and watch it. And you don't eat food, you take a pill.
Yeah. Or I think you could just the pill would turn into food, right?
I don't remember what they did. What an episode, what the issue would be. I can't remember.
Whatever the Flintstone issues were,
right?
It was the exact same thing, just in the future.
It was Flintstones in space.
So,
all right. Well,
but we didn't get to talk about the flying cars. Yeah. But those are theoretically coming too. And it's really interesting, and it's a real exciting time. And
what a future! What a great place to be.
Hopefully, Antonio is wrong.
Yeah, I think Antonio hopes Antonio is wrong.
I hope Antonio is wrong, but
he's prepared.
He is prepared. Yeah. But if it doesn't go that way, the transportation is just going to change, right? That's what's coming down the pipe.
Well, congratulations on at least starting a VC and becoming a VC.
I don't know how I end it now.
It's a brave new world. All right. My guest has been Nick Heyman. Thank you so much. I'm Kent Lindstrom. Talk to you next time.